Sting. One of my favorite wrestlers of all time. One of the greatest wrestlers of all time. One of the greatest gimmicks in wrestling of all time. Sting made a surprise appearance on AEW yesterday and actually has a contract signed. So he is going to be wrestling at AEW now for a time. And the surprise appearance went over incredibly well. Despite the fact, I mean, it would have been even better if they actually had people, like a lot of people in the arena. The pop would have been probably pretty fucking wild because there was nothing that led anyone to believe that Sting was going to fucking show up at AEW ever, let alone last night. And so that would have been a crazy pop, I'm sure. But all the same, the intro was dope. He came out looking great. The makeup looking good as always. Seems to be in still great shape. Trended on Twitter for a while actually that Sting made the comeback, which was nice to see.
Goldberg, is he gonna come out there?
No, Goldberg will actually just injure people.
I don't know, man. Listen, I can't. Wrestling.
I can't hate on Sting, bro. It's Sting. It's Sting. I mean, I'm not out here watching AEW on a weekly basis, but you gotta recognize the good shit. I mean, there's very few wrestlers in that age bracket that could come back and legitimately wrestle. It just so happens that Sting is one of them.
You want to know why wrestling is gonna die here within the next 20 years?
Because the people they keep bringing back to keep it all afloat are gonna die.
Yes. I mean, dude, this is like this is the only reason why wrestling is even where it's at is because of nostalgia. It's almost as though the new generation of wrestlers, there are some gems, there are people they get behind for sure. But I mean, if it wasn't for these old timers, it's over.
Like how many? I do agree with that. How many times do old legends have to come back to put over new wrestlers?
Exactly.
Before the new wrestlers can finally stand on their own 2 feet.
I don't think there's not, and even ones that do stand on their own 2 feet, there's just not enough engagement and not enough people rallying behind those. They're not. It's not like they're winning a new generation of fans. You know, there's a very few people like maybe John Cena, and he's like in Hollywood now. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, he's in Hollywood now. So you got these old timers that, I mean, AEW is basically built on the back of old time WWE wrestlers. Even some of the biggest success that the WWE has had over the last decade has been because of old wrestlers coming back. I mean, The Undertaker's retired. You know, he's got like his last match coming or whatever.
No, that's done. That's done.
Oh, is it? He's done. So he's done. And, you know, unless Vince comes, which I'm sure they will in like 3-4 years, pay the guy, you know, a couple $1 million to show up to fight at a WrestleMania when he's like fucking 65 and barely moves and has a 3-minute match, but everybody will tune in to watch it. You know, when these wrestlers are no longer able to wrestle, what do you have left? It's over. Like the gig is up. The wrestling is going to have to scale down. I'm not saying that it can't survive, but I mean, it's going to have to scale down so drastically that, I mean, it's done. I can't get excited about these wrestlers coming back anymore. I mean, it gets to the point now where I see these guys, and I mean, Sting looked fine. I did see the stuff on Twitter. Like he's obviously older, but like he doesn't look nearly as bad as some of the wrestlers that come back. And you're like, really? You got fucking Ric Flair in here who just had a heart attack last week.
So here's the thing, just to put it on your point, and not, you know, AEW, if anyone was going to do it, it makes sense that AEW was going to do it because they are a newer promotion and they need to have something to lift them up. Even though the promotion itself is run by some of the older generation of wrestlers to begin with, notwithstanding those wrestling. But it's true, as Sam said here, in that when he came out, so Arn Anderson was out there. He's like a 70s and 80s wrestler. Dustin, which is Cody's older brother, Goldust originally. He was 90s generation. He was out in the ring. Cody's out there, 2000s. And then the newest one, Darby, what's his last name? Darby Allin or something like that, I think it is. It was like the fresh greenhorn kind of wrestler. And then Sting's in there doing his thing, and he's all... So, like, they're AEW is very representative of several generations of wrestling, and they are at a scale where they're not as bloated as the WWE because they are smaller, and that's their advantage. But it's true, and I agree that while it's necessary, and this is how I see it, is it's needed, and it's why the gimmick exists, usually for generational talent to put over the generation that's coming after them. Like every major wrestler that's ever been frontline has had to do it at some point to let people get over to boost the next generation of wrestlers. However, for whatever reason, in the last, let's say 2 generations of wrestling, it has been really difficult for people to latch onto the new talent, even if the new talent is actually pretty good. For whatever reason, call it because people are just getting tired of wrestling, maybe the storylines aren't really doing it for people anymore, maybe the gimmicks aren't there, but even if they're a pretty good wrestler and they get put over by these legends, it still doesn't seem to be having the same gravity as when an older wrestler before, like a Ric Flair and Macho Man putting over Diamond Dallas Page, like a WCW or some shit. It just doesn't have the same weight that it used to. And how many times can you pull out an older wrestler to put over a new one before it just loses its weight? You know,
I think it's even more than that now. I think it's not even just to put people over. I think
it's also to draw eyeballs.
I just think it's for ratings. I think ratings are so bad that they're forced to bring these. There's probably nothing more in the world that they'd rather than just keep these retired guys retired. I mean, a lot of them are fucking drug addicts, drunks, hard to deal with. Said some really fucking nasty shit about promotions and just fucking don't want to be there for a paycheck. A lot, not all of them, but you get that vibe. I mean, it's the wrestling business. They trust me, Vince and everybody else, believe you me, there's probably nothing more that they would want to never have to bring back a guy that they retired and just have the next generation go. I get that, but I think we're almost beyond that point now. I feel as though they almost need to take these old school wrestlers and bring them part of the godforsaken roster in order to keep ratings at a relatively good thing. It's not even just like, hey, come in and beat the legend. Next thing you know, you're good. It's like, oh, that was great for a Sunday. By next Sunday, everyone's forgotten about it.
Oh, now it's like an entire storyline with the legend to build up to put them over.
Exactly. It's
true. It's true. It's a tough place to fucking be in, and I don't even know what the solution would be. I'll tell you this, my opinion, which matters very little, obviously, for almost anything. But when I watch AEW, for example, as somebody who used to love and watch a lot of wrestling, and even WWE has this problem for me sometimes, but AEW is way worse for this. The camera work, which doesn't, on face value, if you don't watch wrestling, you wouldn't think the camera work would be like a major component to how enjoyable it is to watch wrestling.
It is.
It's especially since you're watching it from home. If you're in an arena, you can only watch the wrestlers from quite a distance. A lot of the intricacies that make it look like it's a real, I mean, and sometimes they actually accidentally hit each other, but like to make it look more impactful than it is, or to allow somebody that isn't like Bill Goldberg, who's a genetic shit show, to be able to literally fucking jackknife a 300-pound man over his head. You watch somebody like Undertaker or somebody else jumping into that to help them get them up to that position. Stuff like that that's less obvious in a live setting. When you're watching it from home, the camera work is doing a lot to keep the illusion that the kayfabe, the illusion that it's real, what's happening, or that they're actually getting hit or whatever, and it keeps you engaged in that level, like you were watching like anything, like a movie where you know it's fake, but if the camera work's done well, then you're engaged with it. So AEW's camera work, if I have to be honest, is literally garbage.
Yeah.
It shows it's like they took, and sometimes I think it's intentional, but I think that's having the opposite effect, at least it is for me, where it's like John Wick when it came out. Everything was a wide angle lens shot or wide angle shot to show absolutely everything, but the choreography was so good, you could appreciate it. It was like AEW was made by guys who are wrestling pure bloods. They're literally the built on the backs of wrestling families for generations that have such a deep appreciation for wrestling, it was like they wanted to show all of the beauty of the talent and technique of all these young wrestlers coming up that have been trained. But the problem is, while from a purist perspective, who you watch it, you're like, man, they really sold that move well, or they really did well. Look at how athletic these guys are. When you're looking at it from like a story perspective or from an entertainment perspective, it pulls me out. I'm just watching the guys like jump into moves and like aid in like all of the fucking specials happening and shit and whatnot.
It's too clean.
It's too clean.
It's too clean.
Now I don't want 2003 SmackDown where the camera like fucking dove with every hit. Like they got like real fucking aggro with the camera in like the early 2000s. Like every time a punch landed, you could see the cameraman going wham, wham. I don't need that, but
WWE still does some of that.
It still does that shit too. It's not. It's still a thing. But like if you go back, like, and not just because of rose-tinted glasses, but if you look back at the 80s and 90s. And they had like the camera was just a bit further back, and then they zoomed in when it was like they're talking to each other, or it was easier to hide shit. It was like watching it from it was like having the advantage of watching it live from a wrestling perspective of not seeing everything that's happening, while also getting close enough and to be able to get that experience that you wouldn't get in a live setting when they're doing like talking to each other and stuff. But right now you can literally hear, because anyone who watched wrestling long enough knows. Through the throes of a match, if something's changing up, like the camera's so close and so clean, you can hear the fucking wrestlers talking to, like they're in a headlock, and normally you wouldn't see this shit or hear it. They'd be like this, and they're talking to each other, having a fucking conversation. But now on AEW and WWE, you can hear them. They're like, all right, let's go for a fucking, let's take it home, let's finish it, And you're just like, fuck me, we don't need to see that shit. It ruins it. So yeah, I think they need to work on shit like that. But I agree, it's very much become a thing where they're stringing these guys out on marionette strings because they're old men. It's like Bob Barker.
You hear Ric Flair like,
woo! I mean, the swag walk he had, he already looked like he was stroking out. So maybe it's just easier for him now because that's just his natural walk.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, the natural boy. The nature boy himself. Anyway, Sting, he's back.